Hello and welcome to the Viking Code School January 2016 Immersive Student Demo Day. This is the Viking Code School is a fully online immersive bootcamp program that trains future software engineers from advanced beginners to employable. And this has been a long and arduous journey for all of the members here who have, for over the last 16 weeks, been learning everything from the nuts and bolts of coding with Ruby through databases, and SQL, and Ruby on Rails, and data modeling, and data structures, and algorithms, and JavaScript, and JavaScript design patterns, and delayed jobs, and React, and Ember, and Angular, and all sorts of crazy things, and have finally arrived all the way at this moment, which represents the culmination of everything that they've learned. And here today we have a group of, well, we have two groups of 4 students. There were originally a few more, but they managed to find themselves gainful employment. I hope they're watching. This is basically a presentation of their final projects in the course. And so one of the themes of the course that we do here is to try and make everything as applicable as possible to a real-world engineering environment. And of course, part of that is about learning the skills of coding, but also part of it's about learning the process of engineering and how to work on a team. And so that's really a lot about what's been covered here. These final projects are designed to be soup to nuts, fully from idea through. We go through the idea phase. We start in kind of a product mindset, thinking about the idea, thinking about mockups, and thinking about how do we turn that into user needs and user stories. And then from those user stories, we put back on the engineering hat. And we have the students go through, and all of them have gone through and broken up those stories into how many points of difficulty that they're likely to be, sorted them out into a backlog of ordered stories, organized those out into 2 full agile sprints, and then over a period of 2 weeks, perform those 2 sprints using a Scrum-style approach where they were meeting every day, checking in with their team, using Git to manage their workflows, and ultimately came up with these 2 deployable projects. So here we have the Job Hunger application, which is basically an app for tracking your job search progress. I won't give it all away. And we have a Reciffy, which is a recipe sourcing and sharing app. So I'll let the group take it over, but just a quick overview about how today's going to work is basically we'll give the groups, each group will have kind of a 2-part demo. So part 1 is about the product, and so it's what did you build? And so we'll do roughly 10 minutes around that, and then anyone will have a chance to ask any questions that you guys have about the product, and then we'll start with the technical demo where we'll kind of lift up the hood and the students will show you how they built what they built and why this is technically interesting, and then we'll do a Q&A at the end of that. And so as far as everything goes for today, we're going to kick things off with Job Hunger, and then we'll go to Reciffy, and we'll take it from there. So I believe this is your cue, Mr. John. Carry it on.
Great. Thanks, Eric. I believe I am screen sharing and not on mute. So my name is John Kosmicki, and I'm with Job Hunger, and we spec'd out and built an application whose motivation is to assist candidates in their job search. And so thankfully we wrote an about page just summarizing that right here. Specifically, we are intending to combine the value of the publicly information that the candidate tends to go search on the internet for. He likes to look at listings from recruiters and from company websites and so on and so forth, and combine that with his own personal valuable contextual knowledge that integrates in an elegant way to make his job search more effective than it otherwise might have been. To that end, our team is Job Hunger, and we are Kit Langton, Julia Heron, Thomas Lowe, and myself. And our technical stack is a Rails on the back end as basically an API to an Ember front end, which my colleagues will be talking about in greater detail shortly. But first, I am going to lead off with a very brief demo of the actual functional working of the application. So let's start here, and let's start out with a new person. And let's say we have a job searching candidate whose name could be Jeff, and we'll say his email is something that he might have. By the way, these animation libraries are, I think, courtesy of Liquid Fire and Velocity, which I expect Kit may be talking about later on in the demo. But as you might guess, the first thing we're going to do is sign up, and we get. There we go. Okay, so glad you could be with us. One of, I feel, the very strongest points of our application is we are not relying on the user simply to pump the application full of information which he's going to read back himself. In fact, the application and the user combine to put in kind of important contextual knowledge and leverage API calls towards to find valuable information and kind of narrow the search radius of where the user is going to spend his time in an effective way. So what industry? He might be interested in aerospace. And he could be trying to find a job in Los Angeles, somewhere in the area. And so the first thing he's going to do is he's just going to put these two in to the application, and they're going to find relevant companies for him. I guess in this case there's only 2 of them. Well, so let's say he wants to follow these 2. Okay, so in this case, he's going to click All Done, and we're going to go further on in the onboarding process, which I think is important. Now, the 2 companies that he added, they're kind of already banked in the users associated with the user's account in our application, but there's more to be done. First of all, the user can spend his own time looking at the companies, which he would probably be doing anyway, but then also they could be going into the Chrome extension, which is associated with the application and is available at the Chrome store right here. I'm not going to go in too much detail about this because my colleague Julia will be talking about this in greater detail, but we also have functionality to integrate with meetups as well, which I'm going to be demonstrating shortly. But I just kind of want to give a short overview of our onboarding process before we go to the main view, which is our dashboard here. And look, we already have these 2 companies. It's like, well, I might really like Honeywell, and I don't care that much about Aerostar, so I'm going to say that Honeywell is my favorite and click it. And look at that, Honeywell migrates all the way to the top. There's the other thing is we might want to associate leads with various firms. So we could go into our firm Honeywell. Look, we've got a little bit of information in there with from Glassdoor. We've got its website, we've got its rating, and so on and so forth. But the user might know people who work at Honeywell, and they could go into, geez, Harold Brown. He probably works there. And I might think that he would be a good lead. Notice that Honeywell is already populated. If it wasn't selected, we could manipulate that drop-down and select it. But we can just go create a lead, and then we can do things like, oh, geez, I can put in his email address. And then he probably has a LinkedIn here too. And so. Good. So this is all kind of allows the user to kind of aggregate and his more topical contextual knowledge as opposed to just, what's Honeywell, what industry are they in, right? So let's go back to the dashboard. I mentioned a moment ago that they had meetup functionality available, and so we'll click it and look at that. So we'll have to go into space 906, see if there's any meetups available there. Oh, look. Right away, as you can see, our first one is the Toastmasters Club for the aerospace community. That might be a good thing to show up to. And these links are live already, and this will go right to it. So if you happen to be in El Segundo and want to meet people associated with the aerospace, well, geez, next Monday there's a meetup that's right there for you. It looks like it's about lunchtime. I recommend that you could go. Going back to our site, let's go back to our dashboard for just a minute. There's companies, we have leads, we also have jobs, which you can add a job here. I'm not going to talk too much about this because I think Julie is going to go into greater detail with that and the Chrome extension. But one last little detail that I think is kind of interesting is that we have these recommendations, because one of the things that we want to be able to do is we want to build specific contextual information, and so luckily the application kind of guides us towards that direction. Like if we want to add another lead, like Jim Smith probably works at Honeywell, or Aerostar in this case, so Jim Smith is there. And then we're going to add an address for Aerostar. Maybe that would be cool. Wherever Aerostar happens to be honest, I don't really know. And one last piece of functionality this thing has is it also has at least a small element of gamifications, where you want to feel that the time and effort that you spend on your job search is actually being effective. So you add points every time you add a company or a lead or a job. So let's add a company. Would be, I don't know, would be White Aerospace. They probably make like tail fins or something. And look, oh, we have more recommendations for them. We can add a lead from White Aerospace, and that might be Al Hull. He might work there, so on and so forth. And as you can see, every time I do this, the points counter in the upper left-hand corner increases, and so on and so forth. So with that said, I'm going to hand this off to my colleague, Julia, who I think is going to go into the Chrome extension and other related functionality.
Yes, great. Thank you, John. So if you go to the About page, and this is also part of the onboarding, there's a link to the Google Chrome Store where you can download our plugin. So you can see I already have it installed up here, the tiny briefcase. So I'm going to go ahead and log in with an account that I've already created. And great, okay, it seems like I can save some jobs whenever I'm on a job listing. So if I go to dice.com, and let's say that this software engineer job is appealing. I read through the job description, it totally matches my experience, so I'm going to open up the Chrome extension again. You can see that the title, the company, and the URL have all been pre-populated. So I'm going to go ahead and create this job. All right, great. And then I can go back to Job Hunger. And you can see that the job has populated in my jobs table here. So since I added it, I know that I'm interested in this job. And so a recommendation has also been created for me, reminding me to submit my application. And so hopefully I've been, researching Gracenote. I figured out if I have any second or third connections with people that work there, and it's time for me to submit my application. So let's say that I did it, and you can see that the status of my job here has switched to applied, and there's another recommendation ready for me to follow up with the application. So I'll probably wait a couple days so I don't seem too creepy and over-eager, but once that's done, I can click I did it. You can also add jobs just from the console here. So let's say that I know that I want to be a JavaScript dev, and that I want to do that at Google. So I can just go ahead and create the job. Takes me back here, and then I can also choose different stages of where I'm at with this job. So let's say that I'm already at my interview stage. I can also update the URL. Let's say it's like google.com/careers. And then if I click this little link button, it's going to open up in a new tab. So that is the jobs functionality. And at this point, we're going to break for the first set of questions. Thank you.
Great. And as a note, to ask a question, we have the Q&A app on here. So any of the students here, obviously, you're welcome to ask. And then the Q&A app in the Google Hangout on Air, you can click on a little grid, and it should bring down an icon where you can actually ask a question. So feel free to do that at any time. We'll be able to see it. And are there any questions from anyone who's here? Any of the students?
Yeah, I had a question about the Chrome extension. Was there some process to get it approved in some way, or is it something like GitHub where you can just push up to some online thing and it just works?
It's actually very simple. You need to have a Google developer account, which you automatically do if you have Gmail, and then from there you upload actually a zip file, and then within about an hour it gets published to the Google Chrome Store. There is a nominal fee of $5 just to make sure you're not a robot, but it's a pretty simple approval system.
Great, thanks.
We have a question from outside. This is from one Jeffrey. How would you compare working with Ember versus Angular as a JavaScript framework?
Thomas, maybe?
Ember definitely has its advantages when it comes to making HTTP requests. I'll go into further detail about it when we talk about the backend.
Yeah.
But that was one of the main reasons why we decided to go with Ember.
Yeah, if you have specific questions, it might be worth following up when we do get through the technical portion of the demo here. All right, and speaking of, if there are no more questions about the product, let's dive into the technical.
Okay, thanks. Back to me again. I'm just going to take a dive into how the Google Chrome extension works. So I'd like to start with a diagram that was really helpful for my mental model. So the idea is that you get things that you need from whatever page or tab your user has open. And what gets that information is called a content script. So those you register with your extension, and they're going to be active on every tab and window. So those can send information to your background script, which is always listening, and it's always ready to receive information, whether or not your pop-up is open. And then once your pop-up is open and your user is ready to interact with your extension, it asks for information from the background script. So that's how messages get passed back and forth. There is a small amount of overhead with the Chrome extension, and it's just this manifest file. So you need to specify like what are exactly your content scripts. So in this case, we use jQuery and then something called a fill-in script. You also just give it the name of your background script, the permissions that it can access. So in this case, we gave it everything from the user's tabs, and then the icons and other things like that. So at its most basic, a Chrome extension is just a miniature web page. It's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and you can get as complicated or as simple as you like with it. So here we just have our HTML file. You can use styling libraries. You could use Bootstrap if you want. You can do forms like we did, all sorts of buttons, animations. It's really unlimited. So here is the content script that I was talking about. So this is what's grabbing information from the user's web page and sending it to the background script. So we use something called the Chrome Messages API. And so you can see this send message method is just sending the data whenever we call this set title. You can see that we've handled Dyson and Indeed, so we're just using jQuery to find the title and the company of those two websites. So then on the background script side, we're adding a listener that's ready to receive the set title information from our fill-in script, and then it's also ready to send that information to our pop-up script whenever it asks for it. So then the final step here is just our pop-up script, which controls the little extension when it pops up. And so we send a message to get the information. We ask the tab for its current URL, and then it's pretty vanilla and straightforward. We're using AJAX requests to post to our Rails API backend to create a job, and then we're also using it to log in and log out. So that's a high-level overview of Chrome extension, and I'd like to pass it off to Thomas now. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Julia. Thanks, John. So, as you guys know, we decided to go with Ember. And for those who don't know, Ember is a front-end framework which encapsulates CRUD actions similar to Rails. And one of the main reasons why we went with Ember instead of a different framework such as Angular is to take advantage of Ember's JSON API and Ember data, which allows us to make making HTTP requests and handling data in the front end a lot easier. So I'll be going over the conventions. Let's get started. So here we're in the application.js file. We're setting up our JSON API adapter. I'll kind of bump it up a little. we're setting our host endpoint to an environment which is going to be our Heroku application here. And once we have our adapter set up properly, we have to set up our Ember model. And this is provided by Ember Data, which is a library that EmberJS uses. And it allows us to create objects and update objects back to the server. It also allows us to make complex HTTP requests with associations, and also caches data retrieved from the server. So it will increase performance by reducing unnecessary API calls. As you can see here, this looks a lot similar to a Rails database schema. We're setting up our associations and we're setting up our attributes with its specific type. Once we have our model set up properly, making the actual request is very simple. Here we're in the routes file, more specifically the model hook, and this returns a promise. And this is the actual request that's being made. So we're finding a user with the current user ID, and we're also including companies. This also looks very similar to Rails, but this is a JSON API convention, and this is how Ember does it. So we can increase the complexity if we wanted to by including more child associations if we need it, and we can have multiple requests because this returns a promise which is going to be resolved before transitioning to the current state or page. I'll show you how easy creating an object is. So we have an action here which creates a job. It's passed in the title and the company object. After the validation, we're creating a record. In this case, we're creating a job. And we're setting up our associations properly. This isn't yet persistent in the database. It just lives in our store. And the Ember store contains all the data retrieved from the server. To actually persist it in the database, we have to call .save. And that makes the necessary request to create the object. So if it's successful, it will create a new job object with the title and set up the proper associations to the company. And this is pretty much a quick overview of the convention that Ember uses and the overall flow of making the request and handling data. And this is what motivated us to use Ember instead of a different framework such as Angular. I'll pass it over to Kit now, who's going to go into further detail about JSON API in the backend and our recommendation section.
Hi, I wanted to make a loud sound so I summoned control of the thing. Anyway, hello, I'm Kit, and I'm going to show off just a couple of implementations of some of the features of our site. So there is the sort of, John mentioned it earlier, the transition animation framework. It's called Liquid Fire. It's an add-on for Ember. It's pretty cool. So to show how that works, if I click into one of these companies, let me see. Yeah, so let me go to Apple. Yeah, so if I go between the dashboard and Apple, you'll see that the leads title here and the names kind of float in between their positions on the page, and everything else kind of crossfades. That's all made possible with this library called Liquid Fire, which is pretty cool and allows you to sort of set up a transition map and define how transitions work. So if I go to this transitions file, which matches elements by their lead IDs and some other kind of IDs, and then uses this fly to animation to move them between the page, their positions on the before pages. So that's a little cool, really nice library. And Ember add-ons are definitely a big bonus for using Ember. However, it's also really easy to make your own components and kind of dry out your visual elements. So we have these recommendations here. Just another couple of features about them. Some of them have links here, so when you want to add, say, the personal blog for Heinrich Salmonstein, you click on this and it'll take you to a Google search for Heinrich Salmonstein blog. Apparently he does not have one, though. Very disappointing. And And there's one other feature I want to go into this as well. So when you do add certain recommendations, whatever, there is no blog, but if there was, you would then get sort of these branching recommendations that come after that. So when you create the blog, now that they know there is a blog, so if you click on leave a blog comment, it will take you to the blog, which doesn't exist. I hope no.com isn't anything bad. Okay, good. And then you can do that later. So let's take a little look at how that works. So on the front end, Thomas described the JSON API adapter, which expects the data from the API to be in the JSON API specification and conform to the JSON API protocol. So at a schema level, it's just plain old vanilla Rails, nothing special. But there's a nice plugin called JSON API Resources, which gives you these resource files, which lets you, so here's one for company, lets you really explicitly just describe the API. And these are going to be the attributes that are returned from that API endpoint. And it's going to be returned as a JSON API object in that format, which has a specific nesting structure, including links to its relationships, which Ember assumes that it's structured that way and then can make its own assumptions and make things really nice and easy for you. It's kind of convention over configuration in the API and in this cross front-end, back-end integration. It's really nice. But anyway, getting into recommendations a little bit. Recommendations are these. Let me go to recommendations. They're projects that you can complete, and they have some actions, and they have this polymorphic reference of the recommendables. So you can have recommendations on a company, which would tell you, hey, fill out this company's website, or on a person, which could be either contact them or fill out their blog. Which allows it to route to them separately. So you have this polymorphic recommendable item. And the really nice thing about Ember and Rails is that this polymorphism can be expressed on the front end as well. So if I go to the company model on the front end, you'll notice that it actually extends recommendable, which is the way that you express it. It's a polymorphic. It's a polymorphic implementation of the recommendable object. Which makes certain things easy to do. So the way we express this in company and in the lead is that they both include this recommendable concern, which makes a couple of presumptions. Basically, the only thing you'd have to do to make any model recommendable is to create this recommendable actions method, which expects a certain structure, but it basically just gives all the information. It's a bit of information, but since the actual implementation has a bunch of different variation, because there are certain, like looking at the site again, there are certain recommendations that require you to fill something in, and then will immediately update something on the page. Certain ones also have sort of callback recommendations. Other ones have, I guess, on people, have, instead of an input which updates the page, and you'll see that it updates it immediately, some have this sort of completion thing, and some have links, and some have Google queries. So there's a whole bunch of variants here, like LinkedIn account will take you to a Google search, while this one will take you to a website. And if you look here, this one has a query, and it's a kind of edit. Another one is a create, the one where you create a lead. It's a whole different kind of action. So you can kind of just express it in normal human terms here. You do it.
Just be careful, we're losing you a little bit.
Oh no, the tapping, the terrible tapping. I hope that wasn't too stuttered. But anyway, I'm pretty much rounding out near the end. The recommendable is just generally a concern which has some after creating update callbacks and then integrates with the front end. But I think that's about all I'll talk about as far as that. I mean, I'll open it up to questions in case there's anything anyone's particularly interested in. I can go into more detail. So yeah, thank you. And thanks to my teammates. I can't stop screen sharing.
Oh, and also note that this was the brainchild and really great idea of Sam O'Keefe, who was part of our team for a couple of days and did some work on the back end with us.
And hopefully is also listening. Yeah, who's since graduated early. All right, so are there any questions in here? There's one in the queue, but just wanted to give you guys a chance to ask anything from within the Hangout here.
Yeah, I had a question. How did you guys handle the authorization, the user authentication on the front end?
I can get into that because that was a bit of a struggle at the beginning. doing authentication between, because I don't know if we specified this, but our Ember front end and back end, not only are they separate code bases, but they run on different servers. Rails is currently deployed to a Heroku server, and the Ember side is deployed using Surge. And if anyone wants to check it out, you can just go to job-hunger.surge.sh, and that's SH, to check it out for yourself, just by the by. But how did we do the authentication? So yeah, on the back end, we used a gem called Devise Token Auth, because a while ago, Devise ripped out the token authentication system from their particular implementation and left it up to third-party gems. So Devise Token Auth kind of filled in the gap there. And that basically handles everything. Inter-server communication requires that you also have this cross-origin resource sharing gem, which plugs in the appropriate headers and allows access from certain origins, and it makes it all nice and easy. On the front end, we used an add-on called Devise Simple Auth, which is sort of set up to work with Devise and tokens. It was a little complicated. It didn't handshake smoothly. There was a lot of screwing around and hair pulling, but it eventually came together. And now it's quite wonderful. But are you interested in seeing any particular bits of code with that? I mean, it's
I don't know, just like a high level. So is SimpleAuth like a JavaScript module, or?
It's actually an Ember Addon. So Ember, it's kind of like. Yeah, it's hosted on NPM, but it's built to more tightly integrate with Ember, and it's kind of like a Rails, like a gem that's built as like Devise or something. It's not a Ruby gem. You wouldn't really use. You could use it in a non-Rails project, but it's built for Rails. It's kind of similar to that. It's something that you'd really only use with Ember.
Cool. Yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty cool. But basically, yeah, you store you talk to the Rails server. You send it a username and password. It looks based on the unique ID, which is the email. It tries to get the token, and then it compares it against the token that's stored in the user's session, and then it authenticates, and then that's basically how it works in the end. It just always sends that token in with the header, and then it gets the current user on the Rails side, and then you can kind of use it as though it were just current user using Devise on a Rails only application. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool, and so we have a question here in the queue. Let me just queue that up. So do you feel Ember is an all-encompassing front-end framework, which is good for all front-end framework tasks, or is it more suited to specific situations like dealing with heavy JSON API backends? Furthermore, does it have serious drawbacks that you've run into?
I mean, personally, I love it for everything, big or small. The only real problem with it, the only drawback is if you want to use it for something small, the initial Ember new command takes it can take a couple of minutes. So it's it's a little sad. You get excited to do something, you have to wait 2 minutes. But then after it loads, after it installs and does that initial install, it's actually super pleasant. It's just really nice to compartmentalize different aspects of the user interface and components. But it's a little more flexible. Like React is really kind of persnickety about having that one-way unidirectional data flow. Ember is, at least at this point, a little more open to that, which can get you into problems later in huge projects where the two-way data bindings get really kind of invisible, and it's kind of like callback hell or after action hell in Rails or something like that. But it can be really fun for small projects, and then if you expand, it's really adaptable. So you can move over to one-way data binding type situations, and they have the principle of data down, actions up to keep things nice and reasonable. Yeah, I personally love it. I'll let my teammates also react, but I'm a huge fan. I recommend it for everything. You should try it out.
Yeah. I would say I think we all have opinions on that, so we probably should all speak at least for a moment. My thought on that is that it's kind of it has a wheelhouse in that it's really there to kind of elegantly manage a data store for the purpose of CRUD actions on resources. So if you want to manage jobs or applications or leads or recommendations or so on and so forth as kind of a resource and have an elegant way to centralize your data store and so on and so forth, I think Ember is an excellent choice. I think otherwise, if you're not doing those things, it has a little bit of a metaphor of using a cannon to kill a gnat, that you may be bringing too much to the table that you're really not going to leverage appropriately. I think that's just what I feel. I think obviously we all have our 2 cents on that one.
Killing a gnat with a cannon, however, is extremely satisfying. I don't really see the drawback.
So I would say similar to the fact that Ember New brings in a lot of things. There's kind of this mental hurdle that you have to get over with Ember, in that it's a little bit more complicated than I would say like an Angular, just from a conceptual view. For me, it took a while to understand, components. Where do you put things in the router, or do you put them into, the controller? And so I think once you get through that overhead, it's really flexible. I think it's great for a CRUD app, like John mentioned, but I've also seen it used for really great graphing and visualization too. So I think it is really flexible and has a lot of pros and, of course, some cons.
Great. All right, I think we may have time for one more question, if there's anything out there.
Just a quick one. In Ember, if I understand correctly, you have to have your associations both in Ember as well as in Rails?
I think that was a function, assuming that you're using a dual server architecture where you're using Rails as the backend API, which is what we did. You wouldn't necessarily have to do it, but just given kind of the knowledge base of what we had in the team, that was kind of the obvious choice.
Okay.
It's because we decided to go with JSON API and Ember data. It just, once we have the configuration set up properly, it makes it a lot easier to use. So yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. I think that's all we have time for on the questions front. But thank you guys for sharing your project. And if there's a link to where that's deployed right now, where should we send people?
job-hunger.surge.sh.
job-hunger.surge.sh.
There we go.
Yeah,
Right.
Julie's got the link there.
All right. So if you guys want to check that out and play with it and hack it, go for it. All right. Well, so let's move on to group numero dos. That'd be Reciffy. And who's going to kick off with you guys?
All right, that'll be me.
All right, Mr. Andrew, the ball's in your court. Take it away.
All right, so thanks everyone for joining in and taking the time to check out our projects. Before we get started, I'd like to give a quick intro to our team and what our app's about. My name is Andrew Bake. I'm here with Kelsey James, Joshua Meslin-Sarani, and Deepak Hacker as part of the Reciffy team. And today we'd like to give you a demo of what we've been working on at Viking Code School for our final project. So Reciffy is a platform for creating, sharing, and saving recipes for those who have a passion for cooking. It is a full-stack web application consisting of a RESTful Ruby on Rails API endpoint on the back end and AngularJS single-page app on the front end. So what I'd like to do now is to take you through the typical user flow through our app and show you how it all works. All right, so let's dive right in. So here is the landing page for our app. So there's the sign-in page, the nav bar, and a hidden menu. So I'll start by signing in. I already have an account set up, so I'll be logging in with that. The first page that the user is directed to once they sign in is the all recipes page. This is kind of it has all the recommended recipes, the trending recipes. It keeps you up to date on the recently uploaded recipes, the top rated. So you have sort of kind of like a dashboard of what's going on in the recipe in our app. And as you scroll down, our app actually has like an infinite scrolling feature where if you keep scrolling down, it keeps generating rows and rows of various categories of recipes. So let's say, you know, I'm bored with the top rated and the recent. It hasn't been changing much, and I want to see something new. I can keep scrolling down, and the scroll bar keeps generating more and more categories of recipes. So that's a cool feature that we show off. The first thing first, how to navigate our app. So we have a Reciffy kind of brand. Clicking on this will take you to this page, the kind of sort of dashboard page. We have a search bar where you can search users and recipes by tag. So if I type Mexican, I'm interested in Mexican recipes today. Oh, I think I misspelled that. Okay. So here you have users, you know, that with the Mexican tag and the recipes that are tagged with Mexican, or I think that if I try Tumblr, or yeah. And so that's kind of a cool feature that we have. You can also scroll right to look at more recent, more recipes of that category. So for instance, at the top rated, you have the 5.0s all populated here, and if you scroll right, you start seeing 4.0, 3.7, 3.5, and etc. So I'll probably walk you through the menu here. So clicking on your email with your avatar image takes you to the profile page. Here you can choose to upload an avatar. Let's go with the Pikachu picture. So there it is. It updates your image automatically without having to refresh the page in a single page application or single page app fashion. So, and you can also edit everything in place. So right now my name is Harry Last, but we know that's not true. We can change it to Harry Potter. So now my name is Harry Potter, and here you can also edit various other attributes of your profile. You can set your tagline. Let's do the boy who lived. There we go. You can set up your bio, your city, state. You can even add tags. So here's the Mexican tag. I can add maybe I don't know, a new tag like magic. And there's the tags. I can also delete tags. And scrolling down, you can see the recipes that I've made, that I've created. And here, the made recipes, I'll kind of get into that later, but there's an option where you can like click on I made this, and so this is kind of like the list, your track history of what you've actually made in real life. And saved recipes, just your like if you see recipes that you like and you just want to save, here's the list that you've saved. And so that's pretty much it. So if and let's see, to save Hogwarts. And so just to prove to you that it all persists. Oh wait, that should work. Okay, well there's something wrong with that, but anyways, it does persist. Moving on, so we got the recipes. So this again is just a convenience method for getting back to the main page. We next is the My Recipes page. So here is the list of all the recipes that you've created, and let's say I have an idea for a new recipe. I click on the plus and create a few. Let's go here and add a new recipe. So let's do my second recipe. That's the title. I can give it a rating. So here's like a description. My second awesome recipe. I can add ingredients to my recipe. So let's add 10 cups. So you can also select, there's an auto select feature where you can select pre-populated things. So if I type P, there's these are the current recipes in our database. So you can actually select one from the list, from the autocomplete feature, and just add it to the recipe. And so I can add maybe 1 ounce of love. So love obviously isn't created yet. So I can just add that. And so if I type L again, I think, okay, well, I think it should show up in the next part. But okay, so now you can also add ingredients. Hello, this is how you make a recipe. Go, and you can upload photos. So I'll upload some pictures here, and it should upload automatically. Try this one. So this allows me to show, step by step what the process looks like. I can also add tags. Let's try Mexican tag, and I can save the recipe. I can fork. So forking is actually similar to GitHub's feature, where you can actually make a copy a version onto it to yourself. And so I can click fork, and it takes me right to the forked recipe. We actually don't want to fork over the photo gallery and the tags and the rating, because it's pretty much a brand new recipe, and we want users to contribute to the app. So we don't want fork to become synonymous with just copy. And so here, second recipe, you can add different instructions. Here's my variation on this recipe. Because a lot of times there's many similar recipes, and sometimes you see a recipe that you like, you can fork it, add your own variation, and upload your own pictures, see how you do it. You can also leave comments on recipes. So here's my variation on this popular recipe. Let me know what you think. And there's my comment. So that's pretty much how you create and edit your recipes. If you go into saved, so there right here, my second recipe, since I've clicked the saved, it should show up in my saved section. So this is just a list of all of the recipes that you've saved. The made recipes. So again, like if I go back to the main index page, and so like I check this, it's milk and cookies with jelly. Well, this doesn't look like milk and cookies, but I'll say I made this. And I think there we have it. So this is kind of like the list, your track record of what you've made in real life. And this is kind of like things that'll show up when you check out other users. And here, another feature that we like to highlight is our users feature. We don't want to just be boring recipes. We want people to kind of connect and show. So this is kind of the most subscribed. So this is like the list of all the users that have the most subscriptions. Here are the great cooks and various other categories for users. So I can check out maybe Kelsey's profile, and here I can look at her profile. If I see her recipes, she only has one, so maybe I won't subscribe, but let's just subscribe and see what happens. I go to subscriptions, and there I'm subscribed to Kelsey now. Evan Tilsman hasn't been very active, so I don't want to subscribe to him anymore. So going back to subscriptions, he's not there, and so yeah, and so that's pretty much the big whirlwind tour of our app. So yeah, I'll open it up for questions.
And just as a note, for anyone outside the Hangout, if you want to ask questions, feel free to use the Q&A app, which I think, again, there should be this little grid icon on, maybe it's this side of your screen, where you can click, and it'll pull up the Q&A. So feel free to ask questions there. Otherwise, I guess I'll kick things off with you guys in here. What questions do you have for this group about the product?
I guess I would wonder what was the hardest thing about it to build? Oh, this is the front end, isn't it? We're talking about front end.
Yeah, just at a high level, the front end was very difficult. It was just building the nice UI features and everything. But the heart of it was the interface, the data integrity. Basically, like the way we set up our user stories on Pivotal and how we kind of delegated tasks. We had an idea, we had a good vision of what our product looked like. We had a great idea of what it should be, what it should do, but we never agreed, like when we went off and worked on our stories and tickets, that we never reached a consensus on what our data interface should look like. So we each had our own version of the tags service, or like a service, and basically in one part of the app where we updated something, that wouldn't get changed on another part of the app. And this was just, of course, on the front end. And so, yeah, that was a huge frustrating point that we realized a bit late in the process. But it's I guess it's a great learning experience. That's something that I'll take in the future, take with me. Just agree on some interface. How should the data be structured, and how should we interface with that data? Should each service have its own version of it, copy of it, so on and so forth. So that was probably the most difficult part, building the front end.
So I have a question, Andrew. So the forking thing, that's kind of like an analog to GitHub, right? Presumably motivated by GitHub.
Yeah.
Is there some intention that that a group of people using Reciffy would be able to kind of iterate on the same recipe over and over again, and presumably make it better along the lines of what source control does?
I mean, this is again I guess to answer your question, it doesn't go that in depth. It just makes a copy of the original recipe, and in terms of the data, it makes a copy of it and associates it with the person who forked it.
Nice.
So yeah.
It's up to each user to make that recipe their own.
Yeah, and technically you can fork the same recipe over and over again. You can, let's say I fork Kylo Ren's pizza, someone else can fork my fork of this. Mm-hmm. And yes, and to answer your question, yes, they can kind of iterate and make it better and whatnot. But
so would there be any intention for further development to accept pull requests or something like that? That would be kind of cool, because then
that would be
really cool. Yeah.
That was kind of our vision for going, adding that feature to our app. But we only got the basic, the functional of cloning the essential parts of it. So that would be a great way to put that feature forward. Yeah.
All right. I think it's probably a good time to move forward over to the technical portion of the demo. So feel free to dive into that. We'll have some time for questions at the end, and in the meantime, if you come up with a question and you're listening in, feel free to ask the question directly in the app, and we'll get to it at the end. So take it away.
All right. I'm going to start this part of the presentation, and I just want to start out with a kind of an overview of how we structured our app. As Andrew mentioned, it's an Angular app on the front end with a Rails API backend, and so this is just our app.js from Angular. And I'll kind of go through and talk about some of the technologies. So we use REST Angular, which is a layer which basically it's a library that connects between Angular on the front end and an API on the back end. We have UI router, which kind of makes it easier to have a routing structure on the front end, sort of like you would on a Rails site where you're just going from page to page, but without actually refreshing the page. And so those were some of the big technologies we use. We also use Devise for authentication on the Rails side. So I'm going to kind of talk through the app through the lens of the recommendations, and kind of go from the back end all the way up to the front end. So starting from the recipe controller, the recipe model in Rails. There's some methods here which do some queries on the database, and let's just start with this one, personal top 10. It basically gets the top 10 recipes for a particular user, the current user, and that's decided by how high they rated that app or that recipe, and then we get the IDs that are associated with those recipes. So this calls the top 10 method, and then this is actually the recommendation generator, and that puts the results from those two together and turns it into a list of the recipes which fit those criteria. So it's the recipes which are tagged with the tag of the top recipes of that user. So that one's a little bit complex, but it does get some good recommendations. There's a second kind of recommendation that's kind of mixed in there too, and that's subscriptions. So if you subscribe to another user, which is kind of like following on Twitter, if you subscribe to them, they any recipes that they create, any new recipes they create, are going to show up in your recommendations as well. And then this method right here, self.recommendations, is a class method on Recipe, and that joins those two together. It brings those two together and filters out any duplicates here, and then it finds all the recipes which have those IDs which you found from these methods here. And that function is called by the recommendations controller, which is a very sort of bare bones Rails controller, which allows you to call this index action on it and get back a list of recommendations. So that is made use of by the front end through this recommendations service. And it maintains a list of recommendations, and every time you call this populate recommendations function, which happens every time you go to that recipe index page, the main view with all the different categories, it populates the recommendations, and then it allows the front end to use that. So where that's actually used is in the index controller, and so that it grabs the recipes from here and allows them to be displayed in the view. And so that's the first category. As you can see, there's several categories, and it iterates through those recipes, the recommended recipes, and feeds them into the recipe directive, which actually shows those squares that you see on the screen that represent a recipe. So that's our recommendation service, and kind of shows the full stack of the app. So that's all I really want to talk about for now, and so I'm going to pass it along to my colleague Kelsey.
All right, thank you. So let me share my screen. I'm going to be talking about the photo upload implementation. So there are two places in the app where we upload photos, both in updating the user's profile picture and adding photos to a recipe to document just the various steps. So in the user profile, you can see in the HTML we have our file input, which allows us to select it, pop up the file window, and choose a file. Once we choose a file, you see we have this upload image directive. So once we look over here, you can see that the data from the file is extracted, the type and name are passed to the image content and image path, and then the file is read as a base64 string and passed to the update in the profiles controller. So in the update method, you see that we write a decoder for that base64 string here. So you can see that we decode that and save that to decoded data, and then add the content type as JPEG and the file name as avatar.jpg, and then resave that into the avatar so that we can proceed with the update normally, and that's handled through paperclip. So then and then that is passed back to the the user show controller. It updates the profile and then updates the avatar as well. So that is fairly standard. Now for the recipe, it works slightly differently because instead of updating the profile, you're creating a single photo object. So much of it is the same. You still have your upload image, the base64 encoding and decoding, but in the photos controller, in addition to decoding the image, we also have some custom JSON so that we can get the URL, because the photo.url is a Rails method which doesn't carry over to Angular, but we still need to be able to access it. So then we convert the photo to JSON with as.json, and then we manually create the URL with a large, medium, original, and thumb sizes so that we can pass that along to we can pass that back to Angular, so then when that is appended, we can go to the recipe show HTML, and here you can see that we have an ng repeat over the recipe photos with the large URL. So then that all basically works seamlessly. So yeah, it was a little tricky to figure out, but all in all, it works pretty well. So with that, I will pass on to my colleague Deepa, who's going to talk about how we implemented some in-place editing features.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. So I shall talk a little bit, give you a little bit of information about a couple of utilities that we included to make our code more simple, as well as for a more intuitive user interface. So the first one is the Angular X Editable, which is just a set of Angular directives to allow in-place text editing. So let's just see what it means. So here, for example, you're a cook and you're looking at your recipe page and you say, hey, I want to change the recipe name. And what you can do is click on the recipe name and edit it right there and there on the fly. So here I say this is my recipe name, which is an editable text. I also have a function which is called to update the data on the back end after I change the name. Also have the eng disable, which is set to true or false, depending on the criteria whether I want to allow the user to edit the text or not. So here we have a function called the get disable status. All this does is return a true or false, and here's the criteria we used. If you're the current user, you're allowed to change the recipe, but if you're not, the disable status is set to true, which means that you can only change the recipe if you're the current user, and this is a kind of check we had up front. So this is a very simple Xedit implementation, and it kind of makes the things code really simple. So the next thing that I wanted to talk about was the Angu complete, which is also very, very useful. And here's a little bit of code that you can see. This makes, from the user perspective, this makes the app very, very seamless. So it allows you to autocomplete on a search text. It'll give a list of all the pre-populated objects, and the user is allowed to select from that. But also, if that particular, if the user has a selection which is not there in the database, in the pre-populated list, you can still add it. So this is a very important feature that we added. For example, you have a bunch of ingredients that you want to add to your recipe. And let's say the user starts typing spinach. As they're typing the text, it is going to give you a list of all the strings, the search text that matches spinach, whatever part of it, partial or whole match. And the user can select that ingredient and add it, voila, to their ingredient list. It's also possible that there's no spinach in the database. Even in that case, the user experience should be very, very seamless, and you should be allowed to add spinach. And this is how we do it. So we have the Angu complete. The ingredient out here is the bound object. This is a list of array which contains all the ingredient objects from the database, pre-populated, and the name is the ingredient name is what the user is really interested in, and they search on the name. And this override suggestions, this is also really important because only when it is set to true, the user can actually select can choose an ingredient which is not there and add it to their list of recipe ingredients, as well as populate it on the back end. So I'll just show you a little bit about this. Yeah. So once the user says, okay, here's my ingredient, I've selected and I'm going to add it. This is my particular function which is called in the controller. All that does is it's going to parse the data sent by the Angu complete and send it to the backend to be posted. at the back end, what we do is do a find and create by. So obviously, if the ingredient is there, well and good. If it's not there, just add it to the database. So I think that completes what I had to say, and hopefully you've enjoyed our app. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ziba, and the whole team. Does anyone here have any questions? And of course, if you have questions for the Q&A app, feel free to use that as well.
I had a question. It seems like you guys are storing images in the database. What made you guys decide that over something like cloud storage, like Amazon Web Services?
Oh,
We are actually using S3.
Oh,
That's
I'm sorry. Okay.
yeah, like we have a I guess it's sort of a backup, but yeah, that's where the URLs that we got are pointing to the S3 URLs.
yeah.
Oh, got it.
It's paperclip hooked up with Amazon S3. So yeah.
I see. Yeah. Thanks.
Other questions? Well, we do have one over here. So from the Q&A app, how did you handle development roles? With a larger project, was it harder to delegate who does what?
Oh, that's a good question. So the delegation of the roles and like the process and the workflow was kind of like we followed the agile process with Pivotal. We wrote user stories. We chose which stories to kind of like and we had scrums every day to kind of like catch up and to see what needed to be done, check base with the team. In terms of like delegating tasks, we kind of gravitated towards like the stories that we had interest in technically. It's like I did the early like back end hooking paperclip up to S3 in Rails, and Kelsey did the photo upload on the front end. So it was just pretty much what needed to be done that day, kind of like decided what needed to be done. Yeah, so that I hope that answers your question in terms of work delegation. So the one word answer is agile. So yeah.
All right. And we have one more question. This might sound familiar. Do you feel that Angular is an all-encompassing front-end framework, good for all front-end framework tasks, or more suited to specific situations, such as dealing with things? Furthermore, does it have serious drawbacks you've run into?
Well, I don't know. I think Angular is pretty useful for a lot of different things, but I don't particularly like it. It can be kind of difficult to tell when things break, and it can or where things are breaking if it's an Angular problem, and it's also is a little bit difficult to structure the data. There's a lot of different ways you could go with it, and probably a lot of them have some serious problems with them. So yeah, I think Angular is very good for what it does, and it pays to be aware of some of its less user-friendly features. So.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Yeah.
Any other weigh-ins on Angular?
I like Angular so far, but that's because I don't know if I like anything else better, to use something else more. But definitely you have to be very careful in Angular about breaking references and things like that, and that can get really, really tricky.
Yeah, I would agree with that generally. I think it worked well enough for our purposes. I guess, I don't have any specific complaints, but yeah, I would love to, when I have the time, look into other frameworks like Ember and be able to have a larger tool set to work with.
All right. Are there any other questions in here? If not, I think we can say congratulations. You guys are officially done. Thank you. Thank all of you for presenting today. Group 1, Group 2, Andrew, Deepa, John, Josh, Julia, Kelsey, Kit, Thomas, everyone who's out there asking questions. Thanks a lot for joining us. That's a wrap for this cohort of Viking Code School. Feel free to join us for the next one, though, and we'll see you guys later. Bye.